Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. Christmas Eve 2024, St. John, New Brunswick. The kind of cold that locks your lungs and burns your fingertips. On Lancaster Avenue, houses stood in neat rows under a layer of snow, some decorated in lights, most asleep. The neighborhood was quiet, not festive quiet, but dead quiet. By 4:06 a.m., the stillness cracked. A man placed a call to 911. His voice was measured, controlled. "My wife is outside. I think she's not breathing." He gave an address, said she went out for air and never came back inside. Didn't mention a fall, didn't mention panic, no background noise, no signs of chaos, just one sentence that sounded more like a report than a plea. 7 minutes later, first responders arrived. They found her lying face up on the edge of the driveway, arms limp, mouth slightly open, eyes clouded. Her body was angled in a way that suggested no fall. Her feet were bare, her pajama pants soaked at the hem, and beneath her head, a dark stain bled slowly into the snow. Her name was Nicsy Arboleda Rodriguez, 30 years old. The man standing beside her, hands in the pockets of his jacket, was her husband, Diego Alejandro Osorio Angarita, 26. He waved the officers over and stepped aside. He said he found her like that. Paramedics checked for vital signs. None. Pupils fixed. Core body temperature already low. They tried compressions. Administered epinephrine. No response. It was clear within minutes. She'd been gone for a while. But something else was clear, too. She hadn't collapsed there. The snow told a different story. A set of drag marks, barely visible, but continuous, stretched from the garage to the spot where her body now lay. No other footprints led away. No signs of a struggle, no scattered items, just that smooth path and the distinct impression of something, or someone, being pulled. The porch light was still on. And inside, officers began processing the scene. Nothing appeared out of place. Furniture was aligned, floors recently cleaned, kitchen counters dry. The place didn't feel lived in, it felt prepared. No dishes in the sink, no clutter, not even the usual holiday chaos. It was the kind of clean you only notice because it feels unnatural. Her cell phone was found in the living room, powered off. A quick data scan showed it had last been used at 2:11 a.m., a Google search. Then nothing. No text messages, no outgoing calls, no steps recorded by the accelerometer. She hadn't left the house under her own power after that. Detective Staff Sergeant Mark Leduc was called to the scene shortly before dawn. Veteran homicide, quiet, detail-obsessed. He walked through the kitchen once, paused, then walked through again. He noticed the faint smell of bleach near the back hallway. The laundry room was warm, empty, but warm. A forensic tech opened the washer door. Inside, nothing. The tub had condensation. Heat signatures from the metal suggested the machine had run recently, within the past 60 minutes. One more thing. The latch on the back door had a bend in it. Not obvious. Not the kind you notice unless you're trained to notice things that don't belong. There were no forced entries. No signs of anyone coming into the house from outside. Leduc reviewed the 911 call again, now with the scene in mind. Diego's voice had no tremor, no breathlessness. He didn't call her name. He didn't shout for help. "My wife is outside. I think she's not breathing. She went out for air. Then I found her." No urgency, no heartbreak, just neutral statements. And then the line went dead. From a procedural standpoint, there was no probable cause, yet. But in Leduc's experience, calm wasn't always innocence. People grieve differently, he later wrote in his report, but they don't all clean their kitchens first. By mid-morning, Nicsy was officially pronounced dead. The hospital flagged the case as suspicious unattended. Cause of death, under investigation. Preliminary findings noted blunt force trauma at the base of the skull, consistent with an impact, but not with a fall. Lividity suggested she'd been lying flat before being placed outside. Forensics flagged mild bruising on her wrists, symmetrical, faint but recent, the kind of pattern that didn't come from a wall or a staircase, the kind that came from fingers. Detectives began their background check. Nicsy, a Colombian national, had arrived in Canada in 2020 on a temporary foreign worker permit. She worked at a small Latin restaurant, Casa Latina. Co-workers described her as kind, disciplined, and lately withdrawn. She used to laugh more, one server said. But after October, she just stopped showing up to staff events. No formal complaints, no police reports, but whispers of control. A friend mentioned she'd once asked about moving out quietly, said she was worried about how he'd react. That was 2 weeks before Christmas. Back on Lancaster Avenue, officers canvassed the neighborhood. One neighbor across the street said he noticed the porch light flick on, then off again, between 3:30 and 3:45 a.m. Thought maybe it was a motion sensor. Didn't think much of it until he saw cruisers and ambulance lights hours later. No one reported hearing a scream. No one saw her fall. One officer stood at the back fence, looking at the undisturbed snow lining the alley. If she walked out here alone, he said, she walked on air. They say hindsight is clear, but in homicide, hindsight is paperwork, logged too late, signed too cold. By 9:20 a.m. on December 24, 2024, the forensic unit had cleared the exterior scene. The drag trail had been photographed. The body transported. The official cause of death was pending autopsy, but early indicators leaned toward cranial trauma. Inside the station, Detective Mark Leduc reviewed initial incident files while crime techs processed digital devices. One priority stood out: reconstructing Nicsy Rodriguez's digital footprint in the final 72 hours. The phone she left behind held only fragments, but fragments are how cases are built. A warrant had already been obtained to extract logs from the device, which was encrypted but not secured with biometrics. Within minutes, data from her last known login populated. 2:11 a.m. December 24th. Google search for feeling dizzy at night plus anxiety. Prior to that, nothing outgoing since 10:47 p.m. December 23rd. No text messages sent after 9:30 p.m. Last call, unanswered. Incoming from a contact saved as Marcella G., her restaurant manager. It was clear there was no outreach after midnight. No sign she ever called for help. Detectives pulled Wi-Fi logs from the router in the house. The phone never disconnected from the internal network until it was powered down, likely manually, sometime shortly after 2:11 a.m. This was critical. It meant the phone never left the property. It also meant that the story about her stepping out for air was already starting to collapse. If she walked outside, the phone should have gone with her, unless someone made sure it didn't. As technicians deepened the extraction, they began reviewing third-party app activity. Messaging apps like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger were installed, but both showed no activity for over 3 weeks. In fact, her accounts had been deactivated on December 1st. Not deleted, just shut off. Detectives flagged this immediately. Combined with the fact that her financial apps were inaccessible due to missing login credentials, the pattern was becoming hard to ignore. Control. The question was whether that control ended in violence or tried to cover it. Back at Casa Latina, the restaurant where Nicsy had worked since early 2021, staff were being interviewed. According to her manager, Marcela Gutierrez, the last time she saw Nicsy was 2 days prior. The shift had been normal. No outbursts, no mention of fear, but something had changed. She asked me for a copy of her pay stub, not payroll records, just one stub. She said she needed proof she worked full-time. Marcela assumed it was for visa paperwork. But now, detectives were questioning everything. Further interviews revealed that a few employees had noticed Diego visiting the restaurant more frequently over the last 2 months. He never stayed long, just stood outside, parked across the street, sometimes came in pretending to wait for a ride. He didn't order, didn't speak to anyone, he just watched her. Technically, it wasn't illegal, but it painted a behavioral pattern that, paired with the recent deactivation of her accounts, suggested isolation. Detectives began requesting phone records from both parties. While Nicsy's call logs were mostly dead ends after mid-December, Diego's phone showed frequent GPS overlap with her location during off hours, suggesting he was tracking her outside her work schedule. Legally, the question was intent. Investigatively, the question was escalation. Then came the bank records. The financial data confirmed that all bank accounts were registered solely in Diego's name. Nicsy had a payroll deposit going to a joint account that she did not have sole access to. She carried no credit cards, no independent lines of credit, no recent applications for housing, utilities, or employment changes. According to immigration documents pulled from Canadian Border Services, she was still listed as a dependent on Diego's current visa renewal. To the system, she barely existed on her own. Control isn't just about violence, it's about vanishing someone's identity while they're still breathing. Forensic imaging of her phone showed several deleted drafts in her Notes app. Most were nothing. Shopping lists, reminders, one, recovered through back-end logs, was different. It was dated December 21st. A bulleted list, talk to Marcella about hours. Print pay stub, call shelter again, Google sponsor lawyer, don't tell him. The list was short but precise, and it confirmed two things. She was actively preparing to separate. She never got the chance. Back at headquarters, investigators interviewed a mutual friend who had briefly stayed with the couple in September. She asked not to be named, but what she described was consistent. He checked her phone when she left the room. I thought it was cultural or something, but once he got angry because she asked to go out to the pharmacy alone. Said he'd already been out once that day. There were no police reports, no previous domestic calls to their address, no bruises publicly visible. But to Detective Leduc, the pattern was statistically clear. This wasn't about a single night. It was about months of restriction, ending in minutes of silence. By late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the victimology file on Nicsy was complete. No criminal record, no documented history of violence, no signs of alcohol abuse, infidelity, or mental health episodes. In the forensic field, investigators refer to a term called life context reconstruction. It's a method used to frame the victim's final days within the broader picture of their life: social, financial, digital, medical. In Nicsy's case, the context was narrowing fast. She was working to change her circumstances. The footprints were subtle, but there: a deleted list, a reactivated email account, a manager's printout, a missed shelter, callback. In homicide, the narrative is usually told through who died, but sometimes it's what they were trying to do right before they died that tells you why. When the officers walked into 36 Lancaster Avenue, they didn't find chaos. They found control. Every surface looked wiped, every object in place, no visible signs of a struggle. But that was the problem. On December 24, 2024, just hours after the body of 30-year-old Nicsy Arboleda Rodriguez was discovered outside her home, the forensic team was granted full interior access. Lead technician Kimberly Cho ran the initial assessment. She noted an immediate and pervasive chemical scent, mild but unnatural for a home setting, especially at that hour. Swab samples from the kitchen floor, dining area, and hallway all returned preliminary traces of sodium hypochlorite, bleach. It wasn't unusual in itself, but the distribution pattern was. Rather than localized spills or cleaning spots, the bleach was detected in wide swaths across major traffic areas: entryway, hall near the bedrooms, lower third of the stair railing. The mop bucket in the laundry room was empty. The mop was hanging dry, but the drain pan of the washer showed damp residue, and the external heat sensor recorded that a cycle had been completed less than 90 minutes before law enforcement arrived. This aligned directly with the timeline of the 911 call. The most telling detail wasn't in what they found, it was in what they didn't. No fingerprints on the inside door handles, no partial prints on common appliances, fridge, microwave, sink faucet. The only clean prints on the interior came from officers and EMS. This level of wipe-down suggested preparation, not panic. Detective Leduc reviewed the photographic logs from the forensic unit. In the hallway leading to the back door, a small crack was visible along the baseboard, consistent with impact stress. A metal wall hook used to hang keys had fallen at some point. Its hook was slightly bent backward. It didn't match any damage described in the resident's statement. The carpet in the main bedroom had a freshly vacuumed appearance. Uniform pile direction, no embedded debris. Forensic techs performed luminol testing near the bed frame. No significant hits, but under the bed, near the wall, one partial fluorescent trace was flagged for secondary testing. It wasn't blood, it was a cleaning agent, the same bleach compound found elsewhere. This indicated that cleaning had been done in areas where no one claimed a mess had occurred. In the bathroom, a white towel found at the bottom of the laundry hamper contained a faint, reddish discoloration. Lab testing would later confirm this as blood consistent with Nicsy's DNA. No visible wounds at the scene explained its presence. Meanwhile, no signs of forced entry were observed at any door or window. The locks were functional. The security chain on the front door was engaged when officers arrived, an important detail. According to the initial 911 call, the victim had stepped out for air, but no one could have left or returned with that chain secured from the inside. This discrepancy was formally logged. Chain was intact. Either the door was never opened or someone locked it after the fact. The heating thermostat logs were also pulled. Smart homes log everything. At 2:57 a.m., a sudden temperature dip was recorded. Not unusual for an open door, but there were no signs of an extended opening. By 3:03 a.m., temperatures returned to normal. This confirmed what the exterior drag marks had already suggested. The door was likely opened briefly, just long enough to move the body out, then closed. Detectives began building a timeline of movements based on internal environment data. 2:11 a.m. Victim's phone goes inactive. 2:40 to 3:15 a.m. Elevated Wi-Fi bandwidth usage from inside the house. 3:03 a.m. Thermostat fluctuation. 4:06 a.m. 911 call placed. The spike in internet activity raised additional questions. Forensic analysts later retrieved logs showing a YouTube tab opened briefly on a smart TV browser, then closed. The channel history was cleared. The action itself was irrelevant, but the timing was not. Someone was awake, someone had time to clean, and someone had time to browse YouTube. No forensic evidence suggested a third party was present that night. No outside DNA found. No foreign footprints. No outside hair or skin samples recovered. No indication of a break-in or escape. All known data pointed to the conclusion that whatever happened to Nicsy, it happened inside, in an environment that had been carefully reset before the police were called. From a procedural standpoint, the investigators refrained from stating conclusions. But internally, the shift in focus was becoming clear. No confirmed cause of death yet. But the conditions of the scene contradicted the narrative provided. That was enough to expand the scope of the investigation from suspicious death to potential domestic homicide. There's a moment in every investigation where details stop being random. They begin to connect, sometimes not by what they reveal, but by what they contradict. By the morning of December 25, 2024, the St. John Police Department had completed their initial sweep of physical evidence. The body had been recovered, the home documented, and forensic logs were being digitized. But it wasn't the individual data points that raised concern. It was how they failed to support the narrative given. A timeline was needed, not just of when Nicsy Rodriguez was found, but of what occurred in the hours prior. Detective Staff Sergeant Mark LeDuc and his team began to align 4 key elements: digital activity, temperature variance, Wi-Fi patterns, and mechanical use inside the home. Each point on its own meant little, but together they created a sequence that didn't match the version reported by her husband. The baseline was known. At 2:11 a.m., Nicsy's phone went silent. No GPS movement, no background app refresh, no outgoing communications. Router logs confirmed it remained connected to the home's Wi-Fi until it was powered off. The last action, a short browser search for dizziness-related symptoms. She never searched again. Then came a spike. Between 2:38 and 3:15 a.m., household Wi-Fi activity increased. The IP log captured several internal device pings. Smart TV, a desktop browser, and an unconfirmed short session on a tablet registered to the home's network. These devices had no reason to be used if, as claimed, both individuals were asleep or preparing for bed. Forensic IT confirmed the smart TV's brief online access was limited to under 90 seconds. The cache was cleared, but the time signature aligned with the window when movement was detected on the thermostat system. At 2:57 a.m., the smart thermostat registered a 10-degree drop in ambient temperature in the hallway. No other rooms reflected the change. This indicated a door had opened briefly, altering the thermal balance of that single area. By 3:03 a.m., the system stabilized. The door had closed. This was consistent with a body being moved quickly. That mattered, because the emergency call didn't come until 4:06 a.m. Diego's statement, as recorded, indicated he woke up and found her missing shortly before that. But no other device, motion detector, or light sensor registered movement in the home between 3:10 and 4 o'clock. For nearly an hour, the house was inactive. LeDuc reviewed these results in sequence. The conclusion was technical, not emotional. There was no credible gap for an accidental event followed by a delayed discovery. Meanwhile, investigators rechecked the washer logs, the last completed cycle time-stamped at 3:34 a.m. A low-heat wash, not uncommon, but inconsistent with any statement made about that night's routine. The laundry was still warm when responders arrived. The detergent used was identified in multiple areas of the home, including spots on the floor near the back entrance. Inside the hallway closet, a set of reusable gloves were collected. No visible residue, but chemical trace testing later matched them to the same cleaning agent found across the entryway. From a procedural standpoint, this wasn't enough for arrest, but it was sufficient to reframe the investigation. No forced entry, no outside DNA, no sign of a third-party encounter. Instead, what they had was a gap, a 90-minute dead zone where no medical help was sought, no action was reported, and yet the victim ended up deceased and staged outside. This is when lead forensic analyst Cho noted what would later become central to the case. The time delay wasn't accidental, it was necessary. Every event after 2:11 a.m. served a purpose: resetting the interior, washing, waiting, and most critically, calling 911 after conditions were irreversible. Leduc wrote in his report that the scene felt overmanaged. That was the phrase. Not chaotic, not panicked, overmanaged. And that changed everything, because accidental deaths don't usually get cleaned up. In any domestic homicide case, it's rarely just about the moment of violence. The signs of escalation often appear months, even years before the crime itself. You don't always need bruises to prove abuse. Sometimes control leaves a paper trail instead. By late December 2024, investigators began digging deeper into Nicsy Rodriguez's digital and financial footprint. What they found wasn't just the absence of activity. It was the presence of restriction. Nicsy had arrived in Canada on a spousal visa in 2020. Her immigration file listed Diego Rojas as her sponsor and sole point of contact. Over the following 3 years, every renewal, every document submission, every proof of residency had Diego's handwriting, not hers. That wasn't illegal, but it raised questions about autonomy. A request was made to the Canada Border Services Agency for any pending paperwork. On December 27, 2024, the CBSA confirmed that Nicsy had submitted a private inquiry through the Immigration Helpline in early October. The call lasted 11 minutes. She inquired about sponsorship withdrawal and whether leaving the marital home would impact her application. She never filed anything formal, but the trace was there, recorded, logged, time-stamped. At the same time, the Royal Bank of Canada complied with a production order. The records showed that although Nicsy had a personal checking account in her name, the primary access device, the card used for all transactions, was registered under Diego's email and two-factor authentication. Each time she tried to reset access, it was rerouted. She had no functional control of her own funds. Her account received biweekly deposits labeled allowance household averaging $120. That was it. No employment history, no other deposits, no e-transfers. For over 3 years. When detectives reviewed phone records, another pattern emerged. Nicsy had made 8 separate attempts to contact a number listed as Tatiana PR in the last 2 weeks of November 2024. The calls never connected. Tatiana was later identified as a former roommate from Puerto Rico. When contacted, she confirmed that Nicsy had been trying to get out, but had said she didn't feel safe speaking from her phone. They hadn't spoken in over a year before that. There was also an unsent email in her draft folder, dated December 19, 2024, titled simply, Necesito ayuda. Translation, I need help. The message was never sent. In total, the data formed a grid of passive entrapment, restricted access, blocked communication, and quiet withdrawal. To the outside world, Nicsy appeared settled, but underneath, she had been gradually erasing herself from digital visibility, likely as a survival strategy. Investigators also interviewed neighbors. One, an elderly woman named Mrs. Ferreira, recalled an incident just 2 weeks prior. She was out front one morning, no coat on, standing by the mailbox crying. I waved. She went back inside without a word. Leduc added that moment to the running timeline. Small as it seemed, it mattered. In patterns of coercive control, these isolated acts often signify tipping points. While no single document or device could prove intent, the aggregate, voice logs, email drafts, unconnected calls, the restricted bank trail, painted a chilling picture of a life being deliberately narrowed. In the words of forensic psychologist Grace Emerson, who later reviewed the case, People don't disappear from their digital lives unless they're being taught to. And for investigators, that changed the lens. They weren't just reconstructing a night, they were unwinding a long-term pattern of power imbalance, strategic isolation, and structural dependency, one that ended with a woman dead in her own backyard, with no witnesses, no obvious injuries, and no documented outcry. But the silence itself had left records. From the outside, Thomas Stanley had always portrayed control, measured, composed, deliberate. But inside the sterile walls of the St. John Police Department's interview room with no clock and no daylight, that control began to show its limits. This was not the initial interview. This was the strategic breakdown phase, the moment investigators had been building toward for weeks. The interview room was wired for both audio and video, with a secondary feed routed directly to the digital evidence unit. Detective Lisa Harlow, who had taken point on the case since day one, had requested this session personally. She reviewed the pre-interview checklist, inconsistent statements about his movements, phone manipulation tied to Pamela's device, fingerprints inside a buried phone case, and surveillance footage that placed him in the garage past 2:40 a.m., the night after her disappearance. Thomas was read his rights again. He waived counsel. The first 30 minutes were controlled. Small talk, routine questions, a false sense of repetition. But then the footage was played. Frame by frame, they watched his figure drag a rectangular object into the garage, timing matching the purchase of the freezer. He blinked rapidly. No comment. Then came the digital logs, Amazon order confirmations in Pamela's name, pickup logs showing his ID scanned at the store. When presented with the text analysis, proving the messages sent from Pamela's phone didn't match her typical linguistic pattern, he shifted in his chair for the first time. Arms crossed, eyes narrowed. Detective Harlow pressed, "Why would a missing person text their loved ones and never follow up? Why bury the phone?" He answered, "She must have wanted to disappear." But she didn't disappear. Her body had been stored, not abandoned. The breakthrough didn't come from yelling. It came from silence. Harlow handed him a document. A forensics report from the lab confirming Pamela's time of death fell within a 12-hour window when he had no alibi. No work, no receipts, no digital activity besides her accounts being accessed. His breath changed. Still, he didn't confess, but the lie cracked. Following the interview, officers re-interviewed Thomas's sister, who had initially vouched for his distress following Pamela's departure. She disclosed that Thomas had asked to store a chest freezer in her shed for a few days around April 10th. He later removed it without explanation. That freezer was never found, but that statement created a chain reaction. Police revisited garbage disposal logs from local waste services. A request had been submitted online, under Pamela's email, on April 12th for bulk pickup of a non-operational freezer tagged for curbside collection. The request had no unit serial attached. Investigators believe the freezer used to store Pamela's body may have been discarded just days before they searched the house. Although the disposal unit had already reached landfill, they flagged the coordinates. Within 48 hours, the Regional Environmental Crime Unit was dispatched to secure a search area. A square grid search began on May 7th. They weren't just looking for the freezer. They were looking for fibers, trace blood, any forensic residue sealed inside its inner shell. Back in the interview room, Thomas Stanley had no knowledge of the search. His tone was controlled again, but what had shifted was perception. Officers no longer saw a grieving husband. They saw a man whose world was held together by a series of collapsing lies, one timestamp at a time. By April 17, 2024, the Stanley residence no longer bore the appearance of an ordinary suburban home. Yellow tape stretched across the perimeter. Crime scene vans came and went in rotations. Technicians wore Tyvek suits. The freezer in the garage, once dismissed as an ordinary appliance, was now logged, tagged, and transported to a forensic facility under sealed chain of custody protocols. Inside, the frozen remains of Pamela Jean Stanley had been discovered, curled unnaturally beneath household items. The temperature dial had been set to its lowest point. That discovery was the turning point in a case that, up until that moment, had relied heavily on circumstantial contradictions, digital footprints, and character evaluations. Suddenly, there was no need to speculate where Pamela had gone. She had never left the house. Thomas Stanley was arrested the same day. Law enforcement did not conduct a no-knock raid. Instead, they waited until he arrived at work and took him into custody in the parking lot. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. His demeanor was as subdued as it had been throughout the entire missing persons phase. It was as if he had rehearsed for this moment. The Ada County prosecutor filed formal charges, second-degree murder, citing an intentional act done with malice aforethought but without premeditation. The legal distinction was precise. The state was not arguing that Thomas had plotted Pamela's death over days or weeks. Instead, they contended that the killing had been intentional, driven by rage or calculated coldness, but not part of a long-term plan. This allowed the court to circumvent issues of proving deliberate pre-planning while still pursuing the full weight of a homicide conviction. Supporting the charge was a meticulous array of evidence. Digital records from Thomas's iCloud account showed he had accessed security footage and deleted clips from the days immediately following Pamela's disappearance. His cell phone location data revealed suspicious routes taken late at night between March 20th and March 27th, periods during which he claimed to be home. In the garage, a drop of Pamela's blood was found beneath a dislodged shelf, partially dried and covered by a layer of old cardboard. Autopsy results later confirmed blunt force trauma to the back of Pamela's skull. The freezer preserved more than just her body. It had preserved forensic evidence of the blow. When confronted with this information during his first court appearance on April 19th, Thomas entered a plea of not guilty. His defense attorney argued that the discovery of Pamela's body, while tragic, did not directly prove that Thomas had killed her. The suggestion was that she may have died accidentally, and in panic, Thomas had concealed the body. The state dismissed that theory, citing post-mortem positioning and blood pattern data that indicated movement after death, likely to obscure the cause and manner of injury. The judge denied bail. The court cited risk of flight and potential witness tampering, noting Thomas's deliberate deletion of evidence and his months-long deception of family, friends, and law enforcement. As of July 17, 2025, Thomas Stanley remains incarcerated at Ada County Jail, awaiting trial. No plea deal has been accepted. No public statement has been made by his defense team since December 2024. The wheels of justice, while slow, are turning. The public reaction was swift and emotional. This was not just a case about a woman who vanished. It was about a system of manipulation that had operated in plain sight. In the weeks following Pamela's disappearance, Thomas had attended church, walked his dog, posted on social media, and even asked the community for help in finding his wife. Behind closed doors, he was adjusting thermostat settings and freezing her body in his own garage. To many in the community, that duplicity cut deeper than the crime itself. Pamela Jean Stanley was 63 years old. By all accounts, she was gentle, introverted, and supportive, perhaps to a fault. She had been through health challenges and navigated a controlling marriage with little outward complaint. It wasn't until she disappeared that people began looking back at the red flags, the silences, and the patterns of control she had endured. Her death sparked wider conversations across Idaho and beyond about elder domestic abuse, coercive control, and how these dynamics often go undetected until it's too late. Several organizations began pushing for expanded definitions of domestic violence to include psychological manipulation and digital isolation, factors that had played heavily in Pamela's final months. From an investigative standpoint, the case became a model of modern forensic integration. Cloud storage and deleted metadata gave insight into behavior far beyond physical surveillance. Smart home devices provided passive data, temperature logs, access records, and video timestamps that contradicted Thomas's verbal narrative. The role of forensic anthropology and cold storage analysis offered rare but crucial insight into preservation of trauma indicators even after prolonged freezing. Law enforcement officials in Ada County have since conducted updated training sessions using the Stanley case as a scenario-based module. One detective described it succinctly. It wasn't about finding where she went. It was about proving she never left. Pamela didn't vanish into thin air. She didn't run off. She didn't collapse in the woods. She died inside the home she shared with the man she trusted. And then her presence was methodically erased for weeks from both physical and digital memory. But evidence, real evidence, doesn't forget. And when that evidence is allowed to speak, it tells a story louder than any denial. As we close this story, it's not just about punishment. It's about acknowledgement. Pamela mattered. Her silence will not define her. The quiet freezer in the garage was not her final chapter. The community now knows the truth. And justice, though still pending, is no longer frozen. In the end, stories like Pamela's remind us that silence can be deadly and that behind closed doors, abuse doesn't always leave bruises. If you ever feel like something isn't right, whether it's in your own life or someone else's, listen to that instinct. Don't wait for a headline to confirm your fear. Speak up, reach out, help someone feel seen. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if it didn't connect with you, I'd still love to know why. Your feedback shapes what I create next. And if you're still here, please consider subscribing. Hit that button so you don't miss the next real-life case that just might change how you see the world.